I'm trying to think of a song. R&B, R&B. Let it burn.
R&B, R&B, R&B is the podcast, baby, yeah. R&B, R&B, R&B is the podcast. Russ and Blake give you our take. Thank you for joining us today. R&B.
And thank you for joining us today.
What up, guys? Welcome back. We got part 2 of a dive into the ocean of emotion. We got some good feedback last week, and we had to cut it short. We probably could have talked for about 6 hours on that topic. And we've had some emotional experiences since that last discussion. So we're going to take advantage of that and continue where we left off. Russ, thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here. I'm glad that we're doing a part 2, and I'm also glad that it's kind of by popular demand. A lot of people hit me up, contacted me, and just said that they really enjoyed listening to the episode. And me and Blake both felt like, well, we have plenty much more to say on this topic, so let's keep it moving and keep going.
Right. So, me, my job is almost always emotional to an extent. And in particular, I wanted to talk about, I took care of a young dude. I don't take care of a lot of people that are younger than me, but this gentleman was not 20 years old yet. Try to be as vague as possible for patient confidentiality, but under 20 years old, college student, had a public medical event and ended up in my care. So at first, when I interacted with him on the first day, I wasn't taking care of him, but he was intubated, sedated, had a lot going on, and I was just in the room assisting. And then the next day, I ended up being assigned to take care of him, and it was a pretty emotional day. I got to extubate him, so took him off the ventilator, and he didn't know what happened the previous day. Had to explain that to him, and there was like some denial there, of course. Young kid, want to live a normal life. You get some bad news, it's kind of hard to swallow. It's hard to swallow for anyone, but in such a developmental period, it means so much more. And so, long story short, he was kind of acting out a bit. I took a second, sat on his bed, talked to him. We cried together, and he's very appreciative of that. And I felt like it was really important for him to be able to express his emotions in that way, and he needed someone to do that with him, or else he wouldn't have done it, because he was trying to act like nothing was wrong. And it was a difficult situation he was in, and I had to be very frank with him and allow him to have that emotional release. So that took place only a few days after our previous conversation. And I think that us discussing what we did helped me handle that in such a better way than I probably would have otherwise. And his parents were there to witness all of it, and they thanked me afterwards. And even thinking about it now, I'm like, dang, it was like a very heavy emotional day for me, and that can be draining, but I use that to my advantage whenever I can, and let that be a tool always, and give myself a pat on the back, because those are things that not everybody gets to see when I'm there doing it. And I don't do those things for people to see it, though. So just wanted to share that, because on the topic of emotion, that was a very significant event that I'll probably carry with me in my tool belt of emotional experiences.
Yeah, and that experience really can't be taken away. It's interesting how going through those moments does give us like a leadership, or gives us more to our belt about how we can be there for others.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, you said it was kind of emotionally draining or felt heavy on you. How did that feel? Like, did you have any like physiological feelings from that? Do you feel like you could like tell an area?
Yeah, I mean, to start the day, I was frustrated with him, right? So it was something that I was internalizing, because I was understanding of him being on all these medications, and he had been sedated, just coming off the ventilator and stuff. But it got to a point where he's being oppositional to my care, and he wanted to leave against medical advice. And
Mm.
I was getting a lot of pushback, and I was trying to tell him like, oh, I just want to make sure you're okay, so you don't end up back in the hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had been in the hospital before, and he expressed to me that it was just causing him a lot of anxiety being in the hospital, and it was depressing for him. And I told him I understood that, and nobody ever wants to be in the hospital. I've said that before. I'll always say that. Half the time I don't want to be at the hospital. It's not the best place to be at. It's not happy there. So
Mm-hmm.
I like to be happy. So I try to make it as happy as possible. But there's only so much you can do in that kind of setting, right?
Yeah.
So him living a normal under 20-year-old college lifestyle, that's like a very abrupt stop that is kind of hard to deal with. And so I could empathize with him because he's younger than me, but not by much. And I just put myself in his shoes. If that were to happen to me while I was in college, that would be awful. Especially, what he was dealing with. It was not a minor situation. It was pretty scary. So, like I said, I was at first really frustrated because it was kind of getting in the way of me doing my job, and all I wanted to do is take good care of him. So I explained that to him more than once, and then it took probably 2/3 of the day before I really got through to him, which I was grateful that I continued to be patient because I knew that's what he needed. I could tell he was having this external presentation, and I've been in the same situation before where I needed help emotionally, and I was young and felt invincible and didn't want to admit that I wasn't invincible. And then you
Mm.
go through something and you want to pretend that it's not as serious as it is, and you want to continue to be invincible, but life will slap you in the face sometimes. And when you have to accept those slaps and move forward, it throws you off of the path that you're on, because we move in this quick linear fashion sometimes when we're young.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before too, the stages of life. And then when we come into adulthood and we have more responsibilities and there's more real things going on around us, and we're exposed to more things, and really there's more danger, and there's more fear involved with things that are going on, and that's a lot to accept and adjust to. So I was grateful that I was able to go through that with him. I think that all of my interactions with my patients happen for a reason, just like everything else in my life. And um, after having that kind of emotional experience with him, I could tell it made the rest of his day easier getting that out.
Yeah.
And we had established the trust at that point. And then, the last 3 hours or so of my shift were pretty smooth with him. But
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot, putting in that groundwork with people. I spend 12 hours with folks, and that's not a lot of time to really gain someone's trust. So,
Not at all.
I don't blame anyone where it takes me 7, 8, 9, 10 hours to really break through to them.
For
But
sure.
even if it's just those last couple hours of the day where they really trust what I'm doing, I think that that's beneficial in their healing process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's mentally and physically. So back to your question, you asked me about the physical reaction. I had that kind of anger in me, and then I was crying with him. I don't like crying at work, but I told him I cry kind of easily, and I feel your emotion, and I empathize with you,
Yeah.
And then afterwards we shared laughs. So it was like I told him, I was like, you put me on an emotional roller coaster today,
Yeah.
because we went through a lot together in those 12 hours, and
Mm-hmm.
that happens a lot.
Yeah. And, when you talk about people maybe taking like 10, 11 hours to be able to build trust with you, it's interesting because you still have the smock, not a smock. What is it? What is it called? Like
Um,
what the nurses wear.
oh, what, my scrubs?
Yeah, scrubs. I don't know why I said smock. But yeah, so you have the scrubs on and you like represent the institution. You represent the
Right.
hospital institution. So even though you're a trustworthy person behind that, you still kind of have like the sign
Oh
of the
yeah.
institution that you're repping
Oh yeah.
on.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it's interesting because I've kind of dealt with that today because,
Hmm.
I went and we had a great Black History Month celebration at a school that's named after my grandfather that's in South Phoenix in the Roosevelt School District. And the reason why this school is named after him is because in 1982, he was a detective, Phoenix police detective in South Phoenix, and he was murdered responding to a bank robbery right in the heart of South Phoenix. And so the school's named after him. The school's put up in South Phoenix. You know, they have a namesake celebration every single year for Black History Month where they take people like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Frederick Douglass. And then they're also throwing in my grandfather's name as like heralded as that type of Black History Month leader figure. And the reason is because when he was active in South Phoenix, he would try to create a Black police group that would basically police South Phoenix and try to make sure that they were policing their own area and policing their own people so then they could do it righteously. So he would mentor a lot of young men in South Phoenix. He would just try to look out for people's best interests and just, you know, be like real with everybody in the streets, like knowing what it was. And it's interesting because I've always, growing up, had to understand like that history behind the symbol of the badge of being a police. You know what I mean? Because like I'm saying, it's hard for people to trust the person behind the institution that they're wearing.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So this is just something that I think is an interesting phenomena that we just have to be able to get past what we think about the symbol.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes a hospital, people see it as like modern medicine and they're just trying to, you know, they're in business with the pharmaceutical industries and they're not looking out for their best interests. The same comes with this history that I'm talking about because it's a police officer and it's a bunch of young Black people in an urban area learning about how a police officer was doing good things. That doesn't really align with what we think about the institution.
And there's important symbolism again behind me being in scrubs and also a police officer being in a uniform and having a badge on, like Russ was saying. And I'm glad you bring that up because, again, just in this past week, a couple days ago, I had a situation. I had to call security on one of my patients, and it felt like calling 911. And I don't like calling 911 because I don't like to interact with police officers that are on duty. I have friends that are police officers. I've had a lot of good interactions with police officers. I've had more good interactions with police officers than bad ones, but the bad ones are very scary as a Black man.
Same.
And it's a lot easier to remember the bad experiences than the good ones, even when it's your friends involved. And then so I want people to, you know, take a second to put themselves in my shoes. And I've thought about this a lot because I wanted to make sure it wasn't me at fault in these situations. But when I see hospital security guards, I have the same physical response as when I see a police officer out in the street and I'm not wearing scrubs. And I know that I'm not in... Oh, I hope I'm not in danger at work from a security guard, but I know it's not the same level of danger of potential that I would be if I'm just in street clothes and there's a police officer versus a hospital security guard. But again, I feel the same thing inside and it happens almost every time. So even me having to give the report to this security guard, I just didn't want to do it. I was like, no, everything's cool. Like, we handle the situation, let you go. He's like, oh, you know, asking me all these questions and stuff. And it felt the same way as when I've had to call 911 out in the regular civilian world, I guess you could say. So,
For sure. And that's one thing from my perspective that's always been weird because I've had the same interactions with police. You know, I've had, you know, physical where, you know, all types of wild stuff where I'm getting arrested and they're jumping on me all the way to when I was 16 and I got pulled over and they like gutted my car saying that they were going to find drugs and just left all my stuff on the side of the road, peeled off on me. And it's funny because it was always so confusing because I grew up in this like fallen soldiers family that was like a officer killed in the line of duty. I'm going to these yearly memorials and all this type of stuff. And then the, you know, minute I turned 16 and I'm seen as a young man out here, it's like, we don't see any of that. You know, all these young officers were babies in the 80s, right? They don't know about this history. And the only people that really come to recognize are like higher up in the police force. You know what I'm saying? So it's always just been interesting to me because I've always thought like, dang, well, my family paid the ultimate sacrifice. You would think that I might be able to catch some break, but
Yeah.
I wasn't. And
Right.
that just shows how much little people could know when they only look at your surface and try to identify
Yeah.
you as someone.
Right.
And that's why we all on the Black History Month tip, like we all have to acquire the knowledge and the courage because no one is given a pass. Jay-Z has a really good song about this called The Story of OJ. I don't have to say the lyrics, but it's just like no one's given a pass when it comes to that type of stuff, but you can't feel like a victim or be afraid. So it's a
Mm.
weird balance, very weird balance.
Yeah. And, you can kind of attribute that same concept to a lot of other situations, just how anybody is going to have an idea when they first see someone. And it's whether or not that person is going to let that idea be how they interact with that person, or if they're going to give that person an opportunity to really show who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no way that we can just look at somebody and know who they are. You have to let them interact with you. You have to give them an opportunity, and that takes vulnerability. That takes trust in and of itself,
Mm-hmm.
because we have experiences in our past that will create a emotional physical response in our present interactions, and whether we're aware of those or not, it's kind of hard to avoid the bias that we're going to have in our interactions with people. So we have to make ourselves aware that those biases are present and make an active effort to treat people fairly and give them an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's up to you as an individual, because they're in our current world. It's risky to give people that opportunity sometimes because you don't know how people are going to interact.
Mm-hmm.
And in certain situations, you give the wrong person an opportunity, they're going to take advantage of that, right? So, we can't let our awareness be fear, but we have to use it as a tool and to our advantage so that we can optimize situations, and try to have control of how we're going to react.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, from the opposite perspective, when we're a little like less conscious, I think that we think that people are supposed to know more about us, because we come into the
Mm,
situation knowing about ourselves. And
mm,
then we feel as if, okay, I'm here, so you should know me, or you
mm-hmm,
should know something about me, or you should even care about how I feel. Like all the
mm-hmm,
way, honestly, like that's making an assumption. If we're being 100% real, it's making an assumption that someone should really care about how you feel.
mm-hmm,
You know what
mm-hmm.
I mean? Like we're talking about emotions and we like to be empathetic and all these types of things, but going out into the real world, it doesn't really help you if you think that somebody is going to care about how you feel. You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
right.
Because that's how people get taken advantage of, honestly, because you have to be prepared for like
Mm-hmm,
narcissists and people who have
mm-hmm,
malintent and all these types
mm-hmm.
of things.
And it takes a lot of effort to care about other people, and it takes a lot of brain power to like actually think about whether or not somebody is accepting you, or is I guess enjoying your presence. And sometimes we're amongst people to where we shouldn't really care if they care if we're there, because we might be in a big auditorium watching one person. So if the person 2 seats down from me doesn't want me to be there, as long as they don't interact with me, it doesn't matter. Like I'm there doing my thing, right?
Hmm.
But we're in situations where there's so much hate in the world that sometimes people see people and they're like, "Oh, I don't like that person. I don't want them to be here in this large room in my presence." That's
Hmm.
how some people think, right?
For real.
And so that person is emotionally exhausted, whether they know it or not, and that is going to manifest in anger and hate, and it's going to cloud their judgment. And those
Hmm.
are the kind of people you have to watch out for, right? That have that kind of just, tension deep within them, because that's draining their energy that they could otherwise use as a positive reflection in their interactions with people.
For sure.
And I think that tends to manifest in a way that's easy to notice as long as people are aware that it's a possibility.
For sure. And I feel like sometimes as like a young empath, when you're starting to be on this journey of understanding how to navigate an emotional world, sometimes you feel like you can just like dissolve people's hard spots. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying? Like you feel
yeah.
like you can just be with somebody who has like some tightness and like your presence will dissolve them, or they're gonna enter your state of like flowing with you,
Hmm.
and that's kind of a I mean, I understand it comes from a helpful intent, but it's kind of an immature perspective because
Yeah.
you have to give everyone their space and their time to grow to who they are. You know what I mean? Like early on, you might think like, "Oh, wow, I'm vibing. Like let me pull everybody here with me."
Mm.
And it's like that can end you in a pretty lonely and dark
Yep.
place too. And I've felt that to
Yep.
where you have to recalibrate and be like, "Oh, wow, this really is like an inner journey for me." You know, and they taught me the song when I was little, like this little light of mine, I'ma let it shine. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? So I had to go back to the basics and just let my light shine. You feel me,
And that song doesn't say anything about the lights around
bro?
you.
Exactly.
It's a personal journey. So
Hmm.
I'm so glad that you say that because I've been in the same situation. You know, you feel like you pick up momentum in your journey on enlightenment and finding happiness and being at peace, and then you expect everyone around you to be, you know, ready to go along with you because you want them to. You want them to
Hmm.
feel that happiness and that peace. That's just the basis of being an empath, you
Hmm.
know, understanding people and being able to feel that pain. You're like, no, we don't want that pain all the time because there's so much beauty around us. So you're like, look, open your eyes, look at this, and
Hmm.
it doesn't always work out that way, like you said. And uh, I've had a lot of different situations with people that I care about a lot, where a certain, I guess, unfortunate event or situation kind of throws them off path more than it would for me.
Mm.
And I try to get them like, hey, I understand this is tough, but look at X, Y, and Z. And then it seems so logical to me, but it's not always received like that from the other person. And we have to be understanding that everyone's going to respond to things differently. Everyone's going to respond to everything differently.
Hmm.
You look at big world events like large disasters, Hurricane Katrina, or even like a not so natural disaster like 9/11. A
Yeah.
lot of people experience that together, but we all have a different memory of that event, and we all have a different journey of trauma and grief thereafter.
Mm.
There's so many factors involved with things that we experience together. Think of how many factors are involved with the things that we experience on ourselves, you
Mm.
know, as an individual,
Yeah.
and
Where
that
else can
that
even
no one
experience
else
it.
no one else will have any idea of any
Hmm.
detail of those things you went through except for what you share with them.
Mm.
So, you know, it's silly that so many of us do expect people to understand us
Hmm.
because they have no idea what we've been through.
For sure.
And people like to remind each other of that, but we don't always take it into consideration when we're having those interactions.
Yeah. And then we are in a, free market world. So a lot of times if you have a great product, one of the best marketing tools is to make the people you're selling it to feel like you understand them. You know
Mm.
what I mean? So it's like you might be looking for that and then you're like, "Oh wow, like this group that wants to have me pay to go on a retreat or like this people that want to sell me this product seem to understand me."
Mm-hmm.
And then now you're like finding fake doors. You're trying to go through all these fake doors to get to this love. And I'm not even gonna lie, like these types of feelings and emotions is what made me deeper into religion because it made me realize, like, oh my gosh, like there's really nothing out here that I can grasp onto that's gonna like really understand
Mm-hmm.
or love me. I understand there's love here, family, deep, beautiful relationships, what we touched on in
Mm-hmm.
episode 3. But at the same time, I do feel that like, okay, this is a solo journey that my soul's on,
Right.
and I need to have the right philosophy, theology, and words to guide it.
Mm-hmm. I say, look at it like this: we're all on a racetrack, 8 billion lanes going in a straight line, all next to each other. The only caveat to this race is it doesn't matter how fast you finish.
Mm.
So we're all moving along together. We're all going at our own pace. If you want to, you can look next to you and try to outpace the other person, but it's not going to benefit you because it doesn't matter how fast you get to the finish line. What's important in this race of us 8 billion is that we keep moving forward, right? And that we run our own race. They say that to a lot of people, whether it's in NASCAR or in track and field. Run your own race. You can't always be comparing yourself. Track's a very individual sport. So you can run as fast as you can, and you can try to outrun the person next to you. But you trying to outrun that person 9 out of 10 times is not going to make you run faster. So you have to. really appreciate the walk that you're walking. And then if somebody's asking for your assistance, bring them along with you.
Mm,
Offer somebody to come along with you. But you
mm.
can't force people to keep up with your pace.
No, man. And I understand you can only carry people for so long, but say in your metaphor, say in the race of life, you sprain your ankle and you figured out how to heal and get back on track.
Mm,
You can share the knowledge of how you,
right.
you know, retrained your ankle.
Mm-hmm.
You can share the knowledge of how, okay, well, when I started to become low on electrolytes, this is what I did. This is what I used on my rest day. And this is what I used on the day where I was needing to go out there and run far.
Mm-hmm.
These
Mm-hmm.
are the type of tools that we try to go past to the kids, you know, like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
fam, I've been racing for a minute and here's how you tape up your ankle.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how you know, pitch a tent if you need to just veer off to the side and take a nap. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we try to tell these children and tell other people these things because we want to share knowledge. It's funny. The other day when I was working, a kid asked me, he was like, Mr. Davis, if you could go back in time, what's one thing that you would change? And I'm sitting there thinking, like, dude, like, honestly, at this point in my life, my philosophy is that every single thing is perfect. Everything happens for a reason. I understand there's trauma, but the way I see this is it's all aligned and synced and perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I feel that, but like, what would you change? And I was like, you know what? I would go back and I would just give all the slaves in America a map of the terrain that was around them. And that'd be my little contribution. I would jet back. Because just that little bit of information, I think, would have been enough to like change a whole trajectory. Just a
Mm-hmm.
very detailed map
Mm-hmm.
that's honest about where they were at. And I think you see a whole different experience here in North America. But you know, I still didn't even want to say that. I wanted to say it's all perfect.
Yeah, I agree with both of those perspectives because once you realize how vast the world is and how much opportunity there is around you, it changes your perspective and
Mm-hmm.
it changes everything. Having the ability to travel and see how other people live, see different cultures is such a blessing. And I think a lot of people travel and don't really take advantage of that blessing. And it's a privilege to be able to see into someone else's life, whether it's your next door neighbor or someone on the other side of the world. So I think that as far as my journey with whether or not I have any regret, I think that regret is extremely negative as far as emotions go. Regret is fear of a decision you've already made,
Yep.
right? There's no benefit to having regret. Now you can have things that you wish you would have done differently because maybe you treated someone wrong or you didn't take advantage of an opportunity, but you have to use that to your advantage in the future. But you looking back and having regret, you can't be looking in the back and the front at the same time. You can't look behind you and forward. So you got to look forward and move forward and make sure that whatever it is you were dissatisfied about in the past, be honest with yourself about it. That's one thing. People think that to be positive, they have to lie to themselves. That's not what we're asking you to do.
Mm-mm.
We want you to see it at face value for what it is, but also realize that at this point, you're in the now. And what already happened is really insignificant. You might still be facing some of those consequences, and yeah, they're here and you got to face them. But in the grand scheme of things, it's in the past and you got to move forward if you ever want to make it any better.
Yeah. And like they say, you know, honesty is the key because that's what frees your soul. You know what I mean? Like you could keep trying to get over the lie or try to like hide from what you did. But when you start to just like live that truth, you know, tell the people you love, face those judgments or whatever you might feel, but it'll unlock you. It'll unlock everything. And, you know, that's definitely a key. That's definitely a key, dude. I'm pretty sure that's why forgiveness for yourself is so big in the Bible because that's just like what lets people feel free.
Mr. Davis, are you familiar with the love languages?
Yes, I am. I've definitely taken the love language quizzes or tests and had extensive conversations with people about what it means about me.
Okay, so what's your love language?
Well, this is why I was laughing when we talked about this because like when I took the test, mine is touch. And I feel that, like, if we're gonna be completely serious, like, I feel that. I guess, I do like touch, but it just sounds wild. I feel like that kinda sounds like a creepy love language, but yeah, mine was touch.
I don't think it's creepy at all.
Hey, man, I like physical touch,
Yeah,
so, like,
no, that's
it
honesty.
is what it is. What is yours?
I don't like to identify with one love language.
Okay. I wish I would've heard that first, you know?
No, you gave an honest answer.
Alright,
That's
yeah,
how
yeah.
it goes.
Alright,
But I mean, me personally, I mean, I like touch, but I like getting gifts. I like words of affection. Like I
same.
like love. I love love.
Words of
So
affirmation are something I really like too. You know what I mean? If you
yeah,
write me like a poem or something, that's gonna be one of my
yeah.
favorite things. So yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
or even just a simple note feels good to get from my wife. So,
Facts.
I've always felt like the love languages were limiting in a way. Like I agree that those are love languages, but to just have one that satisfies you, that's not realistic for me personally. So I
Hmm.
think that everything has balance, right? And everything lies on the spectrum. I think that anyone that's gonna experience unconditional love should experience all of those aspects in one way or another. I get how someone could identify as one kind of filling your cup more than the rest, but for five little categories to be all encompassing of how to love someone, I just haven't really been able to ride with that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I never really thought about that. Like if you're truly being loved, all five of those would be tended
Yeah.
to, unless there's one I guess you don't like, but all of those sound
Right.
like something that
Right. That's a
someone would
good
like.
point
You know what
too
I'm
though.
saying?
Well, some people don't like being touched,
Yeah, or
right?
getting gifts. It's like, hey, this is
Yeah.
kind of weird. We're not doing that.
Well, and I would say that, getting gifts is probably my least important of the five, but I
Same.
definitely feel good when somebody gives me gifts. It feels like love, or I don't
Hmm.
know why else anybody would give me a gift.
Yeah. So that's interesting because it's kind of like the love languages need to just be like one language. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It doesn't need to be
exactly.
five different languages. It's like we need to learn how to
Yes.
morph those into
Yeah.
one thing we're trying to communicate.
That's all I'm trying to say for
Big
when my
facts.
wife views this and doesn't like my answer.
Yeah, but that's real, and you talk about kind of these very popular kind of psychological trait tests that are in our mainstream. It makes me think about astrological signs, and I understand there's 12 of those and not 5, but I still feel like it's kind of the same way where it's could be limiting, and maybe we need to learn how to like morph that all into one communicative
Yeah.
phenomena.
I mean, you could even say that having 12 makes it more limiting because you're
Mm,
even more division between the categories, right?
true.
They obviously overlap to an extent, but they get pretty specific with the moon sign and the sun and everything.
Yeah.
But I've also found some truth in what I've read as me being a Leo, right?
Hmm.
But I haven't really taken the time to read all the other ones either, so I'm not sure if they really speak to me or not. I can't speak on that.
I agree with you. I'm a Pisces, and a lot of things I've read seem to align with that. And just like you, I haven't studied anything else other than myself. I don't know if that is selfish or if that's just a characteristic of a Pisces, but I've only looked at myself and tried to
Mm.
figure things out. I honestly just think I'm not educated enough on it.
Mm-hmm.
I've always gone super far to figure out like what it means to be human and not like a subdivision of your humanity. Like I've always kind of
Mm-hmm.
thought of it as one like blanket thing and tried to study that
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can agree that I probably do something similar to that as well. But people have a lot of pride in their
for
signs,
sure.
right? And I don't know if it's growing in popularity or if it's just like the age that we're at now, and it's kind of a hot topic amongst people in their 20s or not. But it seems like a lot of people are aware of their sign at
Hmm.
least and know some detail behind it. And I've always found that interesting that, there's so many things we can disagree on, but that seems to be something where at least people know it enough to where they identify with it because you can't really convince someone to identify with anything else other than their like zodiac sign, right?
For sure. And that's one reason I would never like try to talk down on it just because like I'm saying I'm not as educated and I know that a lot of people love it. But one thing it always does tell me is that as human beings, like we're drawn to like a deeper spiritual thing.
Uh-huh.
You know, the fact that we all, no matter what kind of avenue we take, a lot of people are drawn to something that is immaterial and that tries to like describe what they're experiencing.
Mhm.
I love that just because I feel like it shows this trait that we all have inside of us. And I'm like happy that we have it, you know, because that's where when we start to spark great conversations with each other and we start to dive off into like a deeper thing where we just feel it resonating with each of us. I feel like it's that same place.
Mhm.
And I think that that's in us. So we find our way, you know,
Mhm.
to the redemption or the freedom of our soul,
Yeah.
you
And it's
know.
just another tool. I think that any, theory or ideology that is going to try to help people understand themselves is going to have some truth to it.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of theories and other topics as well have some truth to them, right? There's a reason that they get passed down through generations, and then it might as a whole get debunked or get overthrown by a new theory, but there it had some significance at the time of its conception.
Yeah.
So, you know, talking back to you mentioning Black History Month earlier, and then we talk about emotions and how our experiences get passed down through generations. There's a lot of research that shows our DNA, more specifically our mRNA, messenger RNA, has encrypted in it, excuse me, details of experiences that we've had. And if experience is significant enough, it's passed down through generations. So you
Hmm.
think about the history of America and the events that have taken place over the past 200 years. um, some of those experiences passing down through generations are really going to be a lot different in different demographics, right?
For
So,
sure.
so one that's kind of recent that I think people should be aware of is the Black Wall Street massacres. And
Hmm.
Black Wall Street was burned down, and it was one of several cities where Black people were operating, on their own and had a very successful economy
Hmm.
that was basically separate from the U.S. economy just because of how that money circulated within their community, and would benefit only their businesses in their town.
For sure.
And then so Black Wall Street was one of the most successful of these towns, and there's a lot of successful families there, and thousands of people died in this massacre and the town being burned down. And that you have to think about how that disrupted the succession and disrupted the lineage and the progress that was made, not only for the families that were lost in that tragedy, but also the effect that it had on the other communities that were having a similar experience and uh, experience this hate from the external. As they were thriving, now they're living in fear rather than in abundance,
Hmm.
because the same thing could happen to them. And again, that wiped out a very, I guess, significant portion of what was helping uplift the community as a whole. And you have to think of that being, less than 100 years ago. Where would we be now if that never happened, right?
Hmm.
So if you look into that story, if you haven't heard it before, if you've heard it before, I'm sure it triggers some emotional response. Us just talking about it, period. But if you haven't heard about it, the Black Wall Street, look it up, Tulsa, Oklahoma. What happened there is a very significant piece of our history that we would like all of our audience to be aware of.
For sure. I think that it is imperative to know the timeline, right? Because like 1864, 65, you have emancipation following the Civil War, and then we have the period of Reconstruction, right? And in the Reconstruction period, that's where people were going, migrating to like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and these different places where they were building Black communities, and they were given a very high level of freedom, not many voter regulations. Like it was almost on par with what America should look like in the race and with the pursuit of happiness, right? But after Reconstruction, then you have the Jim Crow era. That's what follows Reconstruction. It's really important to know that because it's like, okay, we built freedom, all types of rights and being able to do our thing. And then Jim Crow comes. And if you study, you know, facets of Jim Crow era and the different things that were used to try to destroy the identity and destroy the education and destroy the community, the family. It was an all-out war against the people who built up places like Black Wall Street and the people who were able to use this intelligence to move on. It was a war because they saw how quickly these people were able to do great,
Hmm.
right? So it's important to know the Jim Crow era. Then, moving out of that, we go into the civil rights era. It's important to know that because that's like a combative philosophical approach to the Jim Crow era.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So now you get to see the intelligent thinkers critique Jim Crow and try to reverse it. Then
Hmm.
so I would say maybe now we're in like another reconstruction. A
Hmm.
lot of people say we're in like the prison industrial complex era now, but that's a whole
Yeah.
nother conversation. I would say that we're maybe in a reconstruction.
I think there's a lot of current geopolitical events that would kind of signal a reconstruction for different groups in different ways, and then us all together as well. There's certain things going on that we're all being affected differently, and we have to, again, just take into consideration that a lot of these very significant, emotionally charged events that are taking place, we will all have different ways of I guess, uh,
Reconstructing?
reconstructing and well, but how we're going to relate to
Yes.
these events,
Mm.
whether they're current or in the past. We all have different emotional responses. Again, that's what we're talking about here. When we hear certain things, when we get certain news, when we see certain events, and have certain stimulus that's constantly being given to us through the media and whatnot. And when we look back on it, we have to be able to reflect and see how these events are affecting our journey, but also be aware that the people that we're walking along next to might have a different experience having gone through the same event, right?
Yeah.
That's the empathy piece that's going to allow us to be more connected and be more understanding of each other, and be more of a resource to your neighbor rather than further hindering their ability to get through what it is that we're all experiencing, but just experiencing in different ways. And that's kind of a mindset that I had to develop during the peak of the pandemic, because I know 6 months into the pandemic, I had this kind of anger at the world for not seeing what I was seeing and not understanding what was going on to the extent that I understood. But again, we talked at the beginning of this episode how we can't get mad at people for not knowing what we're going through unless we're going
Mhm.
to sit there and give them every single detail, because even if they had all those details, they don't know how that made us feel, because
Mhm.
there's so many other factors involved with our past and our current psyche. So we have to respect everyone's journey, but also take into consideration the details that might make certain events more significant in one person's life than in another. And that's kind of hard for people to accept, because we think that we should be empathetic to the point where we do understand, there's no question. But sometimes we have to just hear the information and then admit that, that sounds awful and I'm sorry you went through that, but I don't know how that feels.
Yeah, and sometimes that's all people wanna hear rather
Yeah.
than you running around with them and trying to say that you get it.
Hmm.
I wanna it's really interesting that you brought this up. I was recently reading a book about a great civil rights leader, Huey Newton, right? Him and Bobby Seale created the Black Panther Party, and Huey Newton has a book called Revolutionary Suicide, which just is like his autobiography, and he documents a lot of his thought processes through growing the Black Panther Party. And he went to prison, and when he was in prison, he was in solitary confinement. Now, when he writes about it in his book, he says that it was such a freeing idea because he recognized that what his enemy believed was the worst thing that they could do to him was put him in solitary.
Hmm.
And he said that it enlightened him so much to how they thought, because he was like, this is what you're afraid of. This is why you do it to me. And that really opened my mind because I was like, wow, everybody who's trying to make someone feel bad or put someone in a dark place, they're really just doing to you what they're afraid of. You know what I'm saying? And this phenomenon goes deeper. Like if somebody like bullies and people who are just trying to be mean, it's like they're saying to you what they are afraid to ever take to themselves. And it just opens your eyes up to their fear when you see someone trying to bring that energy to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's important to note because as I talked about the Jim Crow era, they use caricatures, like they use like images of like lazy, no good Negroes and put them in the movies and the songs and the dances to try to get people to believe that that's what black people are. Now, today in 2023, I have to sift through all types of art and music that comes through my phone that looks like a caricature version of African Americans. And it's interesting to me to take that idea that Huey Newton said and say, like, this could be what they're afraid of happening to themselves. They're trying to do it to me. They're trying to make me think that I should identify with being violent and
Mm-hmm.
being aggressive and you know, being a criminal
Mm-hmm.
and all these other things
Mm-hmm.
instead of identifying with something much more divine.
Right. Yep. That's powerful.
Hmm.
That's powerful. Um, so w- I guess we can see how technology has continued some of those trends, but at the same time, it has allowed us to have more access to other resources. And
Hmm.
again, like you said, sift through information rather than us being given, here's your newspaper. This is all the information that you have access to, right? So we have to be grateful for the state that we're in now, but also again be aware of kind of the dangers that there are because there is false information that gets spread around, and sometimes there's false information being given to us in our educational establishments, whether it's 100% false or just kind of leaving out some things in between and painting a different picture than what actually took place.
For sure. And, you know, I don't want to get too much into a dark place, but we're here talking about this history. You know, I kind of jokingly said that we might be, a lot of people say we're in the prison industrial complex era right now. It's a true statistic right now that 1 in 4 black men are incarcerated in America.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot, if you hear that statistic and say, well, black men are more aggressive, well, that would basically make you stereotyping and make you kind of racist. But if you take that statistic and think why, well, you can see media when we talk about what was the Jim Crow era doing. What is this era doing? Is this not like a new version of Jim Crow? Like we still have the caricatures. They just look different, but they still are telling us violence, laziness, drug addictions are how we should identify.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's really interesting because it's like 2023, but it's still looking at you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? It's just a
Yeah.
different painting.
Yep, yep. We have to be aware of that for sure.
Hmm.
And we want people to realize that we're not anomalies sitting here in front of you. Like there's
Not at
so many
all.
people that look like us doing similar things, improving the community. And we just want to shed light on the individuals that do look like us and thank them for doing what they do and changing the narrative. Because I know that me, I'm extremely powerful. I have a lot of capability. I am blessed. That's how I label myself, and that's how I live my life. And it doesn't really matter if somebody walks in the door and tells me otherwise, because I've done a lot of work on establishing my relationship with the Most High, and He's put that idea into my mind that I can do whatever I think that I can do. And so I think I can do whatever I want to do. And anybody that's listening to this or watching this, whatever platform you're on, I invite you to think the same way because I'm not any more special than you are. But
Mm,
I'll tell you, I am damn special.
man, and that's some facts right there. You know what I mean? That is just inspirational, and that's why we have to get through the weeds when we have these conversations. Sometimes people just stay in the weeds and talk about like the trauma and the darkness, and then they sound radical or they sound like they are upset.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because when I start to talk about these types of things with me, we could have got hung up on something I said like way back, and you could hold on, no, like that's not true. That type of stuff doesn't happen. That's what happens with me kind of a lot. And then I never get to the point where we talk about, but God though,
Mm-hmm.
but our consciousness, this message, I can do anything I think. It's just that we had to get through the trauma first and talk
Yeah.
about it and understand it, so then we can ascend.
Because it's real, whether or
Hmm.
not our perception of the situation is as accurate as someone would want. Um, the things that we speak about, there's truth to them being involved in history. So
Mhm.
here we are trying to unpack those things and figure out how they're significant in our current lives. Because again, they're in the past, but just because they're in the past doesn't mean they don't matter. We still have to acknowledge those things. One, to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Mhm.
Two, to make sure that we're not allowing that past to hold us back from what's going on now, being aware in that way. And then three, just taking notes of what not to do. How are we going to treat people? What do we want our world to look like? There was a lot of destruction and hate, and there's still a lot of destruction and hate. And when you see those things, you have to ask yourself, why is that going on, and how can I make it stop?
Mhm.
That's at least how I look at the situation, rather than looking at it and being fearful and just thinking that the world's in shambles and all of these things are going to continue to happen. I'm
For
saying,
sure.
how can I make these things stop happening so that my daughter can walk down the street and not be fearful of these things that are taking place?
Mhm.
And, we have to put ourselves in good situations to be able to voice our opinion in a way that it's going to have a positive reflection of how we feel and what potential there lies everywhere around you, because there's
Mhm.
so much potential for so much good, and people have just as much capability as I, but don't always use it for good. So we have to ask ourselves, why is that? Is it because they're operating from a place of scarcity that Russ has mentioned in the past? Is it because they feel desperate? Is it because they've been taught that that's the way that they have to operate to survive? We have to take those things into consideration and be understanding of people that are making these decisions, because they're human beings too. Even if they're doing things that we see as being bad, there's a reason behind it.
For sure. And there's been famous experiments that us as Americans all know, right? So there's the one with the rats that they tested cocaine on,
Mm,
right? Or they mice. It was mice. So they tested cocaine on these mice, and what they did is they had two different environments. One environment was like no stimuli, like barely anything for them to play with, like it's just like dark and not much room, right? Very low stimuli. The other environment was kind of like a cage or a habitat where they had plants and different things to run around with, wheels to play on, all this types of stuff, right? And they both had the ability to administer a dose of like cocaine to themselves, right? And the mice that were in the environment that had more stimuli and that was more lively, they did it once and like never went back to it.
mm-hmm,
The mice that were in the dark, solemn environment
mm-hmm,
OD'd.
mm-hmm,
And that's a famous psychological experiment. But what it shows to us is sometimes the symptoms of the people are the symptoms of the environment.
mm,
Oftentimes, I'm going to say like most of the time. So if you are trying to understand what can have somebody in that type of mindset, then you have to be critical of the environment that they're in.
mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yes, yes, yes. And again, that brings us to the beauty and the power of nature, right? You said they have more plants and more of a natural environment that's vibrant with colors.
Yeah.
I tell everyone, you want to eat colors, you want to be around colors and light, because your body naturally will gravitate towards those things. Uh, Again, light has similar vibration and travels similarly to sound and electricity, and us being energized and us having neural pathways that have electricity sending messages. All of these things, all of these communication pathways are interrelated, and so we have to be aware of how those things move and how we can optimize those things in our environment. And one's being in touch with nature, being outside, feeling the air, feeling the sunlight. Those are just basic principles. And
Hmm.
as you try to figure out how you're going to optimize your emotions and be happy and at peace in this world, just get back to the basic structures of physics and biology,
Hmm.
those things that are there for us, the water and the plants and the soil and the sunlight. Those are
Hmm.
things that are placed by God, that have been there since the beginning of anything. And we often overlook them and don't take advantage that we have those there at our disposal.
Sure. And then you can add in your emotions to one of those like natural phenomena that you can observe. You know what I'm saying? Because your emotions also wax and wane, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
emotions are in tides like the ocean, and that's why we named the episode that. But it's like kind of the same phenomena. As you're observing a tree, you could also observe what's inside of you. And
Mm-hmm.
you can look at it with that type of separation, right? I mean, I would say that that's kind of what a meditation is that you're trying to separate yourself from the emotions and thoughts and be the observer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
nobody ever stares at the ocean and says like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm going back and forth." Like, identify with that. You see
Mm-hmm.
it as it's going back and forth. But for some reason when we look at our emotions, they're like, "I'm going back and forth." Like it's
Mm-hmm.
just as disconnected from who you truly are,
Mm-hmm.
as anything else. And that's one thing that I've worked to try to do is when I meditate, I'll listen for sounds and then I will, it could be like a car driving by or a bird chirping or just some sound. I just start listening because obviously things are going to arise that I don't know when they're coming. And then I realize that, oh, this is the same thing that happens inside of me all
Mm-hmm.
day long. Woo, 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 noises and phenomena. And I'm
Yeah.
just watching it.
Yep. 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 Uh, like an uncontrolled stimuli,
Hmm.
right?
And
So
that's it, man.
yeah, and
That's
a
it.
lot of that stimuli is out of our control.
Hmm.
So you have to be conscious, aware of the stimuli that you choose to expose yourself to,
Hmm.
whether it be sight, touch, sound, whatever it is. You need to know that you are doing that to yourself. You are putting this in yourself and know why you're doing it and what the result's going to be. Because sometimes we look in the mirror, we're dissatisfied, or we reflect, we're dissatisfied, and we don't know why, but we neglect the things that we do to ourselves consistently on a daily basis, and we neglect the power that those decisions we make have over our being. And we talked in the past about decision making. All of these things we're talking about are interrelated: perspective, decision making, your emotions. These are things that we all face on a daily basis.
Hmm.
So for you to not acknowledge them and try to optimize them, you're really doing yourself a disservice if you expect to improve whatever lifestyle or current state you're in.
Yeah. And, it's kind of like a hot stove, it's like you touch it, you know not to do it again. But with our emotions, there's just a billion of stoves out there, and we don't really know until we touch and figure out that we shouldn't do that again. And then that's up to us to be disciplined enough to not do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's funny, Blake. Earlier, I was thinking, I was just like sitting in the sun, trying to just see what thoughts come to me. And I was thinking, I was like, some days we're called to be great. Like some days we have to face that moment where I'm thinking back to when I know on your wedding day it was like a beautiful day. So many people felt such core memories and we all had a beautiful experience, but I knew I had to give a best man speech. And I felt like that day was calling me to be great. Like, even though it was your day, I was like, man, I got to be like, do this perfect. Like, it has to be cool for Blake. You know what I mean? Like, I got to
Mm-hmm.
speak, but also, like, yeah, he has to be relaxed. Like, I woke up early just trying to make sure, like, all right, today's calling me to be great. We got to be great today.
Mm-hmm.
Some days are like that for me. You know what I'm saying? When I'm able to do some of the biggest things that have helped me in my career, in my life, it's like there's certain days that are calling me to be great. But some days just call me to rest.
Mm-hmm.
Like some days really call me to rest. And I realize that for me to be the best human I can be, I have to build a system to discern between the days that are calling me to be great and the days that are calling me to rest.
Yeah, definitely. And I tell people this all the time in the fitness industry: your recovery is just as important as the work that you put in, or else you're going to get burnt out or you're going to get injured or both. So I also feel the same way. My job is usually pretty challenging, but I do have easy days, and I'm grateful for those easy days. I work with nurses that are kind of adrenaline junkies, and they
Mm,
want every day to be like a crashing critical patient and kind of hectic adrenaline rush. And I'm very grateful for when I get to work and leave at the end of the day and say it was kind of a boring day, because I know if I keep rolling the dice, I'm going to get quite the excitement. And I can't handle that every single day.
mm,
Nobody can handle that every day. And that's why the pandemic was kind of so traumatic for everyone, because we were at that same level of intensity every single day, and
yeah.
people are working extra shifts every week and having more exposure to that intensity. It's tripled and quadrupled at times than it would be in a normal situation. So, getting back to normalcy is quite the journey from that heightened level of intensity, and we're still getting there, but we've made a lot of changes recently that have certainly made things feel a lot more normal. And being able to be back in that relaxed state, returning to baseline,
Mm-hmm.
I talked about that on the last episode. We want to have our baseline high in our situations, not be too low, because we are going to dip below baseline at times. That's bound to happen. It's not going to be a consistent linear progression in anything that you do. And if you figure otherwise and you're progressing in that fashion, please let me know what you're doing, because I would love to do it myself.
For real. And then when that time comes where you do belly out or go down, hit me up then too, because I want to know how you're dealing with that, because that's very interesting to me. I like to see, I'm not saying I'm the cynical person and like to see people lose. What I'm saying is I like to see when people have to go through failures and be resilient,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just like that's where we're going to meet each other at.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? That's where we're really going to meet each other at, because it's like fam, me too, and everyone else who's tried to keep going and keep taking care of themselves and keep trying to be great out here.
And your next failure might be the opportunity that you need to be great.
Mm. And you never know. You know what I'm saying? What a beautiful statement, man, because you really never know. And that's why it's so encouraging to just be a young Black man in America, bro, because we honestly get to help mentor, guide, but also take information from the elders and just be in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
just being cool and respectful. Honestly, us showing respect is the reason we're able to do this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like that might be one of the key, virtues is respect. Because if
Yeah.
we weren't respectful to this information in this process, like we would probably be unhinged.
Yeah, yeah, it's very easy to offend people in a lot of these topics that we would like to discuss. So, as long as everyone tuning in just knows that we're coming from a place of love, we don't know everything. We are students of life, and we're always looking to grow, and we're always open to input. And we thank everyone's openness to allowing us to be the stimuli that you are, shoveling into your system today, whether it be visually, audio, or both. You're here with us for a reason, and we want to give you an opportunity to be closer to enlightenment and be at peace,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's all of our goals, whether you know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't say it at the beginning, but of course, we got to thank God for this opportunity to have this conversation, because we've seen another day and the next one is not promised.
Got to thank God for that opportunity. Thanks for tuning in to a dive into the ocean of emotions, part 2. Blake, I feel blessed being able to document these times and talk with you. It's really been a blessing.
R&B podcast, Russ and Blake. Y'all know what it is. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.